Good evening, I'm James Brierton from Charlotte. It is March the 25th, 2020, and as the coronavirus outbreak continues to grow across much of the country, we're seeing some very interesting things unfold. We learned today that Waffle House has had to close over 400 of their restaurants across the country, and as you know, they have a very large presence here in the Southeast. Well, they've activated their Waffle House Index. It's something we've talked about before on the show. And you're going to learn all about it coming up in just a moment. But long story short, what Waffle House does in their Storm Operations Center in Atlanta is track which of their restaurants are open, closed, or between operating on a limited menu. They activated a lot due to weather events, such as a hurricane, and it's used to track the community response to a crisis. Well, now that is being used to track the community response to the coronavirus outbreak. Many of their restaurants do still remain open, just like the ones here in North Carolina and South Carolina, although they're, of course, only doing takeout because of those orders by both the North Carolina and South Carolina governors last week to close the restaurant down. To revisit our 2019 interview with Warner from Waffle House, and now our interview was Operations Center operates during weather events such as a hurricane, but it'll give you a little bit of an insight into what he's doing right now to track not only their assets, but also the responsiveness and the healthiness of their communities that they serve.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Weather Group. This is the 2019 year, and we are starting it off with a bang tonight. We have Pat Warner. He is the Director of Public Relations at Waffle House. We're going to be talking Storm Index. This really became a story here in the Carolinas as Florence moved ashore on the North Carolina coast, so you probably remember hearing about that. We're going to go in depth tonight and talk about the Waffle House Index and how Waffle House prepares for major disasters like this. So we'd love for you to interact with us tonight. You can do that different ways. You can follow us on Facebook Live or our Periscope. All you have to do is drop a question or a comment in the also can drop any questions there. And if you're listening on the podcast version, we will end the show where you can find some information and get some contact info if you have a question about what we discussed tonight. So this is show number 260, and we're happy to have on with you. Major disaster, first responders rush in to help, but after the rescues, those who remain need food. That's where we're like the Waffle House comes in. Famous for their 24-hour breakfast food, the Southern chain is also known for keeping its grills even when the rest of the town is in the dark. In 2011, the federal government introduced the World Waffle House Test, also known as the Waffle House Index. FEMA began to use the simple test to determine how quickly a community might be able to get up and running again the disaster, hence the Waffle House. Which restaurants are open, which are closed, and which are running with a limited menu. They even go as far as to map them. This act is also a formal method to measure a storm's impact. This happened here in the Carolinas during Hurricane Florence. Tweets from reporters along the Carolina coast captured the lifeline provided. But how does this all work, and how does the company do it? I would like for you to welcome to the Carolina Weather Group, Waffle House Director of Public Relations and External Affairs, Pat Warner. Welcome, Pat, to the show. We're happy to have you. And, Pat, we were talking before the show, you're on a trip to Panama City where you were just down there monitoring the recovery acts from Cool.
That's right. I just got back a little while ago. Thanks for having me on the show, and I appreciate hanging out with you all tonight and talking about the Waffle House Index. Yeah, you're right. He's kind of checking in on the recovery efforts down there. It's still pretty tough down there. A lot of the damage into the city. A lot of trees are still down. A lot of folks still don't to live, and that's finding with our folks down there. So I was down there for about 3 days, and just got back here in Georgia and on the air with you guys.
Yeah, we were looking to hearing about it into maybe some of the stories that you've been able to remember from previous games. But before we do that, it's kind of a generic question we ask all of our first-time guests: is what's your career path? How did you get to what you're doing right now at the Waffle House?
Not too exciting of a story. My wife and I moved to Atlanta in Waffle House was fortunate, or however you want to think about it. They hired me about 20 years ago to come into the communications department, and I've been there ever since. Before that, we lived up in Kentucky, and I did some arts and programming and production, and that's where my wife and I met. But like I said, we moved down to Atlanta in 1999, and I was fortunate to land at Waffle House.
I always do it every show. Forget to unmute my mic. We always talk about, we were talking before the show. You really didn't have the weather bug, but since being in this position, you've been able to follow the weather a lot more closely.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like we were talking about, I was a sportscaster, so we used to make fun of the weather guys because they had the easiest job in the world. They come in late, they watch the Weather Channel, rip some stuff off the wire, go on and point. But yeah, when I got to Waffle House, realized it affects so much of our business that we're always monitoring the weather. We're always looking at forecasts. We actually have some resources within the company that sends out reports to the entire company forecasting what it's going to be for the week, what it's going to be for the weekend. Because really, no matter what the weather is, it really impacts how many people come through the door, whether it's a hurricane or just a afternoon shower. And in Atlanta, if it's an afternoon shower, then you can have horrendous traffic. So each market is really monitoring that weather, and it really impacts how we perform each day.
Yeah, that's something we wanted to talk to you about, Pat. How do you guys monitor the weather? You were talking about maybe from your average everyday summer afternoon to maybe a bigger snowstorm or a hurricane moving into the area. So how do you guys do it? What resources do you guys use? And is it a team effort, or is it maybe just one or two of you guys? Explain how that process goes.
Well, really, pretty much everyone in management that runs the restaurants, we call that our operations team. They're monitoring the weather. Nowadays with the apps, they're monitoring. They're monitoring the national weather. Here at the office, back here at our headquarters, are in Norcross, Georgia. We monitor for the whole system, and we have we have a gentleman by the name of Matt Stark, and he helps us put together what's going on out there in the weather. That's not his full time job. He's actually in our purchasing department, and he's dealing with coffee future forecasts and things like that during the day, and then we say his night job is he's doing the weather forecast for us. So he kind of keeps us all abreast and gives us the early warning if there is a storm. When it comes to hurricane season, he is really monitoring it, and we start monitoring the storms even before they're a tropical depression, just because we have to see how they are developed, where they're going, so we can have all of our resources and the time needed to get our resources together to respond.
So tell us about, what is it like, in the Waffle House Storm Center? When I first saw that tweet come out, we were like, oh my God, that is the best job of meteorology. So what is that like? What kind of personnel is in there, and how does that get spun up? Is that something you have all the time, or is that just for events?
No, we activate when there's a major storm or a major event. And so the Storm Center for us, it's really a conference room, and we just bring in some extra technology and equipment, mainly so we can all get around the table, and it's the ease of communication. Like I said, we all have day jobs, and then when we activate on the storm team, we all have additional jobs. We have one gentleman that's kind of runs the storm center, and really for us, it is we call it a storm center, not a command center, because our leadership's in the field. Our executive vice presidents are in the field already, so they're the ones really calling the shots when the storm. Our CEO will be on the ground. Our chairman was at both hurricanes this year, so our leadership's in the field, and we're more of the situational awareness of what's going on, and helping them with what resources they need. So we kind of marshal those resources. So that's really what's going on in that room. So we have obviously Will Mizell is the guy who heads it up. He's kind of our quarterback. We have a couple of folks in there from our purchasing team that are working with our suppliers to get the food in. We have typically one or two dedicated resources on lodging, because we're going to bring in a lot of folks, and we got to put them up somewhere. And so they're dealing with the lodging. We'll have somebody from our social media is in there, because they're monitoring the storm through social media and also feeding out information. We also have folks in there from our construction team and from what we call our people team. And they kind of, the people team handle the, after the storm, what are the of our associates down there? Do we need to put them up? Do we need to bring in supplies for them? And so all that's around that table, and we're all kind of there. My role now, I'm more back at the Storm Center. I say I always compare it's better at the Storm Center because I can eventually come home to my bed here in Lawrenceville, but the satisfaction you get is out in the field because you impact you're having, and the people are very appreciative. And then really my role throughout the storm is I'm the one that's the state, federal, and local agencies get sharing information and also getting information from them, and then also like y'all alluded to. We get a lot of press attention, so I take care of that back in Atlanta. So our folks in the field, they can focus on the important stuff. Not that the press isn't important, but they can focus on getting restaurants open and taking care of our people.
That's a great segue, Pat. That was going to lead into my question: was how you integrate with the local to be there, supporting the local Waffle Houses in those locations. How is your reach expansive enough along the coast to cover all these areas, or how do you do this? Is this like a massive support regionally, or pull from all around to?
Yeah, good question. Well, on the agency side, we work locally because really what impacts us the most is those local decisions on the curfews and evacuations, and those are made locally by the county executive. In Louisiana, they have the parish presidents or the county executives or the sheriff. They're the ones making those decisions locally. So we try to build those relationships up now. We're actually doing that now in the preseason of hurricane season. So we can already have that conversation with them after the storm hits. Hopefully we don't have to have that conversation, but we already know each other. Before the storm, here's our plan for operating a restaurant under a boil water advisory. Here's what we're going to do if there's no water. Here's what, so they do the plan. Do a lot of that beforehand. Then myself and some others from the office will meet with the state and FEMA, both in DC regional offices. So we're in contact with them a lot throughout, just mainly to build those relationships up before you need them. A great example of that was Hurricane Isaac many years ago. I was on the jet into New Orleans, and I was in a restaurant, and we were in the restaurant we're helping out. They needed the dishes washed, so I was washing the dishes there at the high counter. I looked up, and there's a lady with the clipboard. She's the local health inspector. That's the last thing you want to see. So I went and got the manager. Manager comes out. They knew each other by the first name. They hugged. They checked on each other's family, and so they had already had that relationship built up before the storm. And so we try to do that in all of our locations locally, so we have those local relationships solid before the storm. And then you're talking about the logistical side of it. It's really twofold. We have what we call our operations teams, the folks that run the restaurants. They're in the restaurants. We will bring in restaurant operators from outside the market to help out. Engage them in a safe place so they can get there right after the storm blows through. And typically we bring them from 2 states over because say there's going to hit in North Carolina. Well, everybody's going to evacuate to South Carolina, and they will come in and help get the restaurants back open. A lot of times they are running the restaurants for the local restaurant operator because those first few days, our local restaurant operators really focused on their people, checking on them, making sure they're okay, seeing what they need. A lot of times our folks are like, I'm ready to work, send me in, coach. And they're really coordinating that. So we bring a outside reset stage, and they come in right after the storm to help triage the damage. We also have some other folks from the corporate office that come in. We typically bring in somebody who's from safety. That's really important. So they are there on site. Like I said, our senior leadership's there. We'll sometimes bring in if we have to set up a lot of generators, we have to set up a fuel depot. And if you set up a fuel depot, you need security because everybody knows where the fuel is if they can't get it. We're also giving fits, so we truck in big tankers of fuel for the generators and our people. So it really kind of scales up how big the storm is. And as the storm gets bigger, then we're going to have more resources going into the storm. Every year, even after we're in the process right now, after Florence and Michael, we have probably close to 50 to 60 different things we're going to tweak just because we do a big after action with our operators and everybody involved. Say, what could we have done better? What did we learn from this storm? So that's a big part of our process too, is that post-mortem after the storm. So that's the process we're in now.
Very good. And I remember Hugo very well. And it's nice to know you guys have had this many years to be seasoned and experienced in the things. So With that, thank you for all of those answers. It answered a lot of details for me. I know that was great. I'm going to pass off to Evan now. He's got a question, I think, about the index. I think we're going to move into that portion.
Yeah. So, Scotty had alluded earlier that this.
The true Waffle House Index, we credit former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate. He's the one that came up with it. Actually, when he was the emergency manager in the state of Florida in 2004, they were hit with a few storms, and he kind of came up with it and used it as a informal way to judge the storm. And what he would tell his people is, after the storm, drive. If the Waffle House is open on full power, keep driving. If the Waffle House is on a limited menu, there's limited resources in that area, keep driving, and basically drive till you find the first Waffle House that's closed, because that's where it's really the worst, and you work your way back. When he was named FEMA administrator, that came up in his hearings in front of the Senate, and the Wall Street Journal did a big story on it, and then that's really when the Waffle House Index took off, and a lot of people were really paying attention to us. We say we love the attention, we appreciate the attention, but also there's a lot of pressure because now people are watching us. We're in 25 states. We're not in the nation, but I got calls from reporters about our response to the California wildfires. We don't have any restaurants in California, but we're synonymous with crisis response. They just assumed if we had restaurants, we were doing something. So that really took off, and really Craig Fugate really helped FEMA's culture get more private-public partnership. Before then, we kind of did our thing, and the public sector did their thing. He really kind of brought it together because he really saw the importance of working together. And we're blessed that we get the attention, but there's a lot of great companies out there with great storm response, and FEMA listens to all of us. You have Walmart, you have Home Depot, you have Lowe's, you have Walgreens is incredible, Publix. A lot of organizations have this similar response. And really what FEMA uses, they get that data from all of us. So they see that if we're open and there's a Walmart open and a Publix open, they don't need to put a supply center right there. They can use that resource and put that someplace else. And they have really done a lot to engage the private sector. That has moved to the states and local agencies too. So FEMA now has, whenever there's a storm activated, they activate what's called the National Business Emergency Operations Center, where we all can join. And I'm plugged into them here in Norcross, but we can share information with them in real time, and also with other companies. So I can talk to the other companies that are responding too. So they have really done a great job. We're fortunate that the spotlight's on us a lot. We'll take it. But there's a lot of companies that are doing a lot of good things for their communities, and FEMA really has locked into that. And I think it kind of boils down to the Waffle House Index, but there's a lot of good going out there with the private sector companies.
You mentioned that there's the three levels of the index, I think, open, limited, and closed. How is that incorporated in their website, and how they deal with outreach across the Southeast when there's a hurricane or something like that?
Yeah, other companies are more sophisticated than we are. I send them an Excel spreadsheet twice a day, and they have to incorporate it in, and they create a map that has all the private sectors on there. There's others that are more tech savvy than we are, but we still do the old fashioned Excel spreadsheet and share that with them. And it's funny, there in the last in the current administration and the past administration, we didn't get that spreadsheet in on time, and it was funny because we got a call saying that both President Obama and President Trump are waiting to see the status of the Waffle House restaurants, which that blew our minds, because we're thinking, they should be focused on more important things, but we can just say to them, yes, President Trump, they're serving bacon, we're good. But so we're updating in real time in that National Business Emergency Operations Center, but we send them twice a day open close update, which ones are on generator. We actually get in more detail because they want to know which ones are on generator, which ones are on boil water, things like that. So it's a pretty big spreadsheet.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for answering my questions.
Yeah, Pat. So I got a question here. Is there any coordination done with? I know you talked about building the partnerships with local local municipalities and such before an event, which is extremely important. Now, once an event starts, like Hurricane Florence or Hurricane Michael, what is the usual, I guess, game plan for your response? Not just with local but regional and federal assets. I mean, did they call you up and say, hey, we could use you over here, or how does that work?
Yeah, really, we're kind of more independent than that. We just let them know which restaurants we're opening up, because that's the best thing we can do. We do set up a lot of times before storms coming with power companies, the National Guard, local municipalities, where we will cater them. They'll come by in the morning and pick up so many breakfasts or lunch. So that usually happens as that storm's coming on, and we have some relationships already built up with some of the power companies. And unfortunately, when you go to a lot of storms, it's everybody's driving this way on the interstate, and then we're on this side of the interstate with the same power companies and those people, and we're going into the storm. So we have built those relationships up, which that helps us too. If we need to get power back on quickly at a restaurant and we're feeding them, they're going to probably make sure that we get the power back on more quickly. But we set those up. But really, we're focused on those restaurants. We did twice. We have a resource that we deployed a few years ago. Baton Rouge had some bad flooding, and then just most recently in Michael in Panama City, we had two restaurants that the one in Baton Rouge was flooded, and it was going to take a while to get reopened. In Panama City, within the city, there was nothing, so we actually deployed our food truck down there and set that up after the storm. And for Hurricane Michael, we set it up in front of a restaurant and gave away we gave away food, and we gave away close to 6,000 meals just to the community, just because they had no other place to eat. So we'll hear that sometimes too. I remember the flooding in Columbia, South Carolina. The word kind of got out that we need fresh water, so we were able to get a couple of trucks into our restaurants, and then let the local authorities know, come by this restaurant, and we have a truck full of gallons of water. And so we'll listen to them and see how it's going. And sometimes they'll reach out to us, but most time they're interested in which restaurants are open and what are we facing to get the supplies in. That's another big part that they want to know about, so they can kind of help ease that up for all the private sector people.
Oh, that's awesome. And I can tell you, just from a personal note, I spent 15 years before I got into weather as a firefighter. And actually, you talk about the floods of 2015 in Columbia. I was one of the people out rescuing. We rescued almost 200 people in the first 48 hours of that event. And from the outpouring of support from all the local businesses, national businesses, and nonprofits, you guys make a world of difference. And just me personally, thank you.
You're welcome. We say our responsibility for responding to storms twofold. One, it's to our associates. If we're not open, they're not making money. It's that simple. And we feel we got a responsibility to get open quickly, because they've just come through, like the folks I was meeting with down in Panama City. They've come through some horrendous situations where they have to repair their homes and all. So they need to get back to making money. So that really drives us. And the second is for our customers and the community, because we've seen it through the years, starting with Hugo, that the more quickly we can get open, the more the community comes back. If they see our signs are lit up, then we see other businesses are starting to open. And plus, it gives folks, hey, we made it through this. We're going to be okay. Our goal is for more restaurants to open up, and we actually do talk to other restaurants. FEMA has invited us to speak to different seminars, and we're open with other restaurants to show what we do, because we feel the faster we all get back, the better. And so we've done that. And then in some situations, we'll have a restaurant next to us, a competitor, throughout the year. But after the hurricane, there's no power, but we have a refrigerated truck on our property. We'll let them store their product in our truck, just because our goal is to get everybody back quickly. It's not just about us, and whatever we can do to get the community back. So those are the two things that really drive us, because people ask us why we do it. I will tell you, we don't make money off of it. We throw a lot of resources at these. Wilmington, North Carolina, for example, it was basically an island with all the flooding, and we had restaurants there. We were basically flying in people and supplies. We call it an airlift. We brought in people and supplies for one day because we could not get trucks into Wilmington, and And that's not the most cost-effective way to run a restaurant. Is to some long-term goodwill with the community is what pays for it for us.
That's awesome. I think who's up next? I think Evan. Yeah.
Yeah. So stepping away from the index for a second, the houses themselves, the Waffle Houses, y'all stay open a lot longer per se in storms than most other restaurants around. I think you're pretty renowned for that, actually. How do you manage to stay open amidst, some people throw out safety concerns and other issues? How do you, deal with that?
Well, again, we're in contact with, like I said, typically it's the county or the local governments that's setting those evacuations, setting the curfews. We're in contact with them. Once it's a mandatory evacuation, we're not going to be open. We're not going to have anybody in harm's way. But right up until then, we'll try to stay open the best we can. And the deciding factor is the people resource. And unfortunately, Florida gets a lot of storms, and I think, to be quite honest, a lot of folks in Florida didn't think Michael was going to be that big a deal, and so a lot of our folks didn't evacuate. And fortunately, everybody was safe, and nobody was injured. But there's some harrowing stories of they should have got out of there because that was a category. Yeah, I think right after the storm, I will tell you they're going to cook what is safe. They probably haven't got the truck resupplied. Again, not a very smart business decision. As we're tracking the storm, we will stock all the restaurants up, and we're basically betting that they're going to be okay. So we will stock the restaurants full before we evacuate. A lot of places will put a small generator on that can run the cooler, just in case we lose power. So we'll do that. And so really, right after the storm, they're coming in the restaurant. If the food is safe, they will cook what's in the cooler because we got to get rid of that food because we got more food coming in. And then it really depends on the situation. We have that we have items on there that we can prepare and serve that we don't need water. We have a no power menu. We were down to just serving two things, but people were fine. We basically said, you want breakfast or lunch, and you got eggs or you got a hamburger. And it really depends on what resources we have. And then once we're up and running, we might still have a limited menu just because if we're the only thing open, we're going to have a lot of volume. So we might pare down the menu where it's just simple to cook items that we can get out quickly, burgers and hash browns, eggs, hash browns, bacon. Go through our items and see what we can do. One of the things I will tell you that if it's a no water menu, we will not serve waffles. The reason is we don't need the waffles to make the waffle mix. It's the cleanup. We store our batter in 1 gallon, basically plastic buckets. And we realized after one storm, we had so many stacked up in the back room. And if you have no water, we're basically setting up, the Cajun cookers out back to boil the water to make it to wash the dishes. And we just realized it's not worth it. So there's no waffles on the no water menu. Mainly because of the cleanup. So we go through that and we learned some things in this storm that we're going to tweak our menus. And really we allow that flexibility for those decisions to be made in the field. Some restaurants might be on this menu, but right down the street, they have more resources, so they'll be on this menu. That call is made in the field and we support it back at the office. So our operators on the ground are making those decisions. And our goal is to get back to the full menu as quickly as possible, but sometimes the resources don't allow us to do that.
So, Pat, I think I can speak to everyone on the panel saying you're making us extremely hungry at this point. But as you're talking about the menu and you're talking about the limited, based on whether you have power, you have water, one of the things that kind of struck me the most in looking at some of the images that were coming out of the devastation that we saw down in Bay and Gulf counties with Michael was the Waffle House food truck. Now, that was not something I've seen before. I don't know if it's something new to the Waffle House that you've started to deploy to some of these harder hit areas. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we about 5 years ago, we got a food truck here and it's based in Atlanta. We have one. It gets around, so people think we have a lot of them. But we only have one, and it's mainly for catering. It is booked solid. It's amazing how many weddings they do. We have the Super Bowl coming up in Atlanta. They're already booked for all these different parties. But twice we've deployed it. We kind of use it as a part of our relief effort. if we have a restaurant that's really damaged, and like we had in Panama City, where we knew we weren't going to be able to open it up for weeks, maybe a month, because it had some major structural damage, we brought it to that. We also brought it to Baton Rouge after a flood. We had a restaurant that was flooded. So we'll deploy that if we need that resource down there. Panama City, it's close to, I think, 900 meals a day in Baton Rouge when we did it up there. So that's just something we use it if we need that resource. And luckily it's based here in Atlanta, so we can get it pretty much anywhere pretty quickly. I hear rumor we might be getting a second truck, which I'm very excited about, because I do a lot of events and community relations things, and sometimes I can't get the truck. It's already booked. So it's really booked. It's up to the Carolinas. Like I say, we only have one of them, but it gets around, so people think we have a lot of them. But it will go all over the place for different events. And typically we have to bring some support vehicles with it. Typically a refrigeration truck, especially if we're going to be there for a while, to support the truck. But we basically cook what we can in a restaurant out of the truck. So that's kind of a stopgap that we have to use sometimes.
And so, Pat, we've really enjoyed learning a lot about what you guys do, and I'm just astonished at what you guys do, and the spirit that you guys given to the communities who have been affected, and that's where we kind of want to start to transition to the last part of our interview, is some of those stories that you've been able to hear, maybe from colleagues of some of these areas. And, we can talk about Michael and Harvey and Irma and Florence and Katrina you were talking about. Is there any stories from some of these major events that kind of reminisce in your mind, and you're just kind of just like your jaw drops when you hear these stories of how these communities who've been affected by this are actually, it probably brings a smile to them knowing that you guys are there to help them?
Yeah, I think what I take away from is how great our associates are. I mean, it's amazing what they've gone through, and then they're there to serve their customers. I just got back from Panama City, talked to a lot of our associates down there, what they went through. Just heard some incredible stories of one of our cooks had to walk 8 miles because his home was destroyed, and he was one of those that thought it wasn't going to be a big storm, and he walked out and went to the nearest restaurant. We had 2 other associates who came in from Mobile to help out on a jump team, and they were working in a restaurant, and they bonded so much with their customers. When their time was to go back to Mobile, the customers begged them to stay, and actually one customer gave them his condo on the beach to stay in. So they're staying in this incredible condo on the 21st floor because this customer didn't want them to go back to Mobile because he had made that bond with them. They were right there after the storm. So they stayed. They're actually now, I talked to them, they're going to relocate and they're going to move to Panama City now. We have some other stories of folks down there that just overcome a lot to just get that good comfort food. Another great story was many years ago in Oklahoma, Norman, Oklahoma had like 1 week with just 3 incredible tornadoes blew through, and we had a group of associates who they made it through. They were fine, but they knew that the restaurant was going to be busy, so they got in the car, and what would have taken like a 5-minute trip because of all the debris took them about an hour to drive to this restaurant, and they had to talk their way through like 4 police barricades. And they basically said, we have to get to the Waffle House because we have people wanting to eat. And it's just that dedication blows me away for people who want to, get there. And when you think about it, it makes sense because our restaurants are tiny. People are in there every day and they build that connection with their server. And that happens all the time after the storm. The customers are coming to the restaurant to check in to make sure their favorite Waffle House people are okay. Then we're checking on the customers. It's really that sense of community within that little store that goes on, and so those stories are big. Another story happened many years ago. We had a supplier bring I won't say their name, but they brought a truck of soft drinks in from their headquarters in Atlanta, and they showed up, and it was a truck full of soft drinks, and they said, well, we need to unload this, and our folks said, we can't unload this. So somebody back here in Atlanta was able to get to the CEO of this organization who called that poor truck driver who probably never met the CEO. And the CEO basically said, give Waffle House the keys to that truck. They'll give it to us when it's over. And we got them a ride back. So our suppliers go above and beyond too, because they know the impact that when we're open and using we need those supplies to get open. That's kind of a Waffle House legend story that goes back a couple decades. But I've been on the jump team a few times. Like I said, in Hurricane Isaac, you just have families. It's their first hot meal, and it's very emotional. And they can charge their cell phone. It's the first time they've probably been in air conditioning in a couple days. And I had family after family talking about, this is our first meal. We've been eating, canned stuff, and they hug you, and it's amazing that sense of community that little bitty shoebox has. But I think it really shines in times like this. Every day we'd like to have that sense of family in that restaurant, but after something like a big hurricane, that's where you really rely on your family, and we feel like that family is pretty strong in that restaurant.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the heat is so oppressive after these storms, because it's so muggy and humid a lot of times that, especially after Florence, it's just, I mean, what do? You can't escape it. We're lucky if you get a cool down after a hurricane. I remember after Hugo, it was just miserable, no power. It was great if you could hit a grocery store where there was some power and have that little blast of AC. It was wonderful. But yeah, it's nice that you guys do that for everyone.
A lot of people don't realize, typically after a hurricane, the weather is gorgeous. I mean, it's clear skies, but it's hot and humid. But everybody thinks when we come into our response after the hurricane that we're in rain and all. Typically after the storm blows through, it's gorgeous weather. It's sunny skies, but you're right, it's hot and humid.
Pat, we've had a lot of response. I was just looking at some of the comments. One guy in particular, Nick Craig, he said he was actually in the Wilmington Waffle House this year during Florence, was talking about his experience there, and he just sends his appreciation and gratitude to what you guys were able to do in the Wilmington area. As we kind of end up with our interview, one last question, talking about these storm stories. I know you were able to go out to these different events, particularly here in the Carolinas. We've had Matthew, and we've had Florence, and we've had the Columbia floods. Any particular things that kind of stick out here in the Carolinas that you experienced through these recovery efforts?
I remember the Columbia floods, especially because I came in right after that with that truck of water, and just the appreciation people had, and it was kind of surreal as you're coming into something like this, and you have the supplies and the truck behind you. How people are excited to see you. This happened in Panama City. We had a restaurant that our folks got to get open quickly, and the word got out that the restaurant was getting ready to get open, and so the parking lot was full of people cheering our folks as they showed up. And one of our managers said, I felt like I was going into the big game and going through the tunnel, because the customers were outside cheering us as we got there, because they needed to get the restaurant open. Stories like that. Another one comes to mind. We had a ice storm in Atlanta a few years ago, which the nation made fun of us because it was nothing, but the whole city shut down. And we had a restaurant off of Georgia Highway 400, and it was just a district manager and a cook was the only one in this restaurant. But everybody had abandoned their cars on the highway and walked up the exit to that restaurant, and they were the only two people in the restaurant, and they were like, "What do we do?" And I think the customers were worried that they were going to shut down, so the customers actually got behind the counter and helped them serve other customers. So our two employees cooked, and the other people took the orders, busted the table, washed the dishes, because they didn't want the restaurant to shut down, because that was their place. They were getting warm. They were able to charge their cell phones, and they were able to eat. And a lot of them stayed there for like 2 or 3 meals, because the whole city was paralyzed, and they were there for like 12 hours. So that's another neat story that happened. And then on Wilmington, I should have sent you the link. I think it was WRAL. The reporter and photographer were in our restaurant eating, and looked up and realized that first our corporate head of IT was on the door. We had about 3 executive vice presidents in their bussing table. Our CEO was behind the counter, and our chairman of the board was all in there at the same time. And so they, being good reporters, they grabbed their camera and did a story about that. But that that story is great because that kind of shows our response that everybody's there just to get the restaurants open and doing whatever they can to serve the folks there. And like I said, the reporter was just lucky. There's another story. I think Jim Cantori was in downtown Wilmington, and he walked in on a restaurant that had no power, and they were in there because they had gas. They were cooking, and he went live. He was live, and I think that's out there too. So those are two good. If you want to see the Waffle House Index in action, Google those and take a look at those.
Pat, it's been fascinating to hear about this. And before this show, the audience they didn't hear this, but Pat has told us during hurricane season this upcoming year that he doesn't mind giving us some updates from time to time if it's affecting the Carolinas. So we're definitely going to take you up on that, Pat.
Okay, I'll be there.
I appreciate the opportunity you've given us tonight, a little bit of your time. I've always loved Waffle House, but after tonight, I love it even more. I mean, this has been awesome, and just the given spirit that you guys have for the communities affected is just amazing. And I know that good things are going to continue for Waffle House for what you guys are doing for the community. If any of our followers tonight, watching live or those on the podcast version, if they want to keep up with you guys at Waffle House or the Waffle House storm recovery efforts, is there any social media pages or something they can follow to kind of keep up with the efforts?
Yeah, typically on a storm, we will post a lot to our social media, Twitter mainly. We use at Waffle House News is one of our handles, and of course at Waffle House is the mothership of all of our Twitter. But we will push things out on Twitter, some on Facebook, but typically more on Twitter because it's it's quicker to get things out. We'll do a little bit on Instagram, but if you want to follow the index, follow the Waffle House News and Waffle House.
That does it for this episode of the Carolina Weather Group. Please stay subscribed. We have new episodes coming out and down the pipeline very, very soon. And we want to remind you that our friends at WCNC Charlotte are hosting weekday at-home weather classes for you, the parents, the teachers, and the students. You can find new episodes live on their social media platforms each day at 1 o'clock, or you can, of course, watch them on demand at a time that suits you a little bit better. Today, Chris Mulcahy did Experiment explaining why it rains, and we've also had a presentation previously from Brad Panovich doing some really cool stuff, including making a cloud in a bottle. So again, you can find those on the WCNC Charlotte YouTube channel. But for now, from Charlotte, I'm James Brierton. Stay subscribed, stay weather aware, and we'll see you back here again real soon for more Carolina Weather Group.